So our next speaker is going to be Dylan Taylor. Dylan Taylor is a businessman. He has been the CEO of Fortune 1000 companies, involved in banking, real estate, and now he is involved in space investing. He's the CEO of Voyager Space Holdings, which is hopefully going to put together the next SpaceX. But he's also the head of Space for Humanity, which is a nonprofit which seeks to democratize space, to make human expansion to space something that truly benefits all of humanity. So without further ado, Dylan Taylor.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Robert. I really appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen and launch my slides here. Okay, so really what I'd like to do with my presentation today is be a bit provocative. The topic is opening up space for humanity, but hopefully I'll give you some topics to think about. I really want you to consider our future together in space. So first and foremost, let me just ask a very simple question, or should be simple. What is space? And I've reflected on this quite a bit within my career, but I think there's a lot of answers to that question. One is, of course, it's a technical challenge. We know that. And it's a harsh environment. It's not designed to have humans living and working in space without technology. It's also, as Robert just mentioned, an investment opportunity. And increasingly, retail investors are becoming interested in space for that reason. But I think fundamentally, in addition to it being a destination, for me, what it really means more than anything else is a tool for transformation. And I want to spend more time talking about that because I think building a sustainable space economy very much has to win not only the minds of our colleagues here on Earth, but also the hearts. And I want to spend some time talking about that as well. So the answer, of course, is all the above, right? Space is all of those things and more. But I want to focus on a couple of key areas within that framework. And I'll also ask another question that I'd ask you to reflect on. Why does space matter? And, you know, I think for many people, it's exploration. It's the innate gene that we possess as humans to ask what's over the hill. And we've been doing that since, you know, humans began roaming the Earth, as we know. And it's also a bit, I think, this promise of gain, of fortune, of making your mark, you know, sort of the ambition, if you will. But I also think, for me, what I would say is space is a new paradigm. And it inspires us and it allows us to reimagine the best version of what humanity can be. And the reason why I think that's important is we have to win people over if we're going to unlock the economics that we're going to need to truly open up space. I also think space represents the best of us and it embodies a more hopeful future. And I think we can all agree, regardless of your politics, we need more optimism and hope in the world today. There's no doubt about that. So I would just ask you to reflect on this. What is your why? Why are you involved in space? Why are you interested in space? And I would reflect on a really high quality answer to that because I think it really does matter. Well, let's talk about the how. I mean, the why is important, but without the how, we're just dreamers, right? We're not getting anything done. To me, the how is all about harnessing innovation and assembling capability in an economically useful way. So let me unpack that a little bit. The new space phenomenon is real. Credit Elon and SpaceX and others. The innovation is at an all-time high, but it's not necessarily being harnessed. And what do I mean by that? We have disparate capabilities that are innately complementary, but there's really not a single company or a single entity that's really assembling that capability in useful ways. I also believe in free markets, and we must have an economically sustainable space economy. Otherwise, we're not going to get escape velocity. We just won't have the engine burning or the fire burning to keep the space economy going. So the other thing I would just ask you to reflect on, I'll spend a little bit of time, Robert mentioned Space for Humanity, to reflect on the importance of social change. And why am I bringing that up in a business technical presentation. It's because without this, I think we have run a real risk of not getting enough people on board to really have the substantial resources we need to open up space. So I think it's really, really, really important. And just reflect on what the Apollo mission did. You know, I think 1 billion people tuned into the image on your screen there. I wasn't alive at that time, but it was a transformational event for humanity. And of course, the Earthrise photos we know, born the environmental movement. The first Earth Day was, I think, about 6 months after this picture was taken. So it opens up our perspective. And I think that's really, really, really important. My viewpoint is if you want to change people's mindset, you should change their context. And this has been presented before. I think a few of you probably have seen this, but this is sort of a, what's your perspective? What is the highest state that you relate to? And I think most people are kind of stuck in that tribal band there, perhaps, or maybe they're a bit nationalistic. But I think what we need is a broader perspective. And I think space really does create that. Okay, so let's talk about what's happening actually in the industry and what's driving the economics. Substantial disruption, as we all know. And really, as we all know, because we're in the industry, the era of, call it disposable airplanes, where we were flying a Airbus 380 from Dubai to New York and throwing it away at the end of the flight, that's over. And again, credit Elon, credit Gwen, credit SpaceX. They really cracked this nut. And for me, it was really the SpaceX Falcon Heavy dual landing that just completely blew my mind. And I think that was also a milestone within the industry where retail investors were really starting to catch on, saying, you know what, something really significant is happening in space. So that's a key disruption, because a lot of the business plans in space now close because we have inexpensive, reliable, reusable launch. And of course, the prices have went down substantially. These are round numbers, of course, but the space shuttle was circa $100,000 a pound. We're headed towards sub $1,000 a pound. And if Starship works, and I don't think anybody would bet against Elon, I certainly wouldn't, it further changes the game even more with heavy lift capability. So let's talk about the actual space tourism piece. I think this is really important from, again, winning the hearts and minds of people outside the industry. It was, when I gave this presentation earlier in the year, about 590 people have been to space. Of course, that number has already changed. And I think the current number, depending on whether you define space as the Kármán line or sub the Kármán line, is around 604. So this is changing incredibly rapidly, as we all know. And just reflect on this: 604 people total have crossed the Kármán line, round numbers. But within that number, only 24 people have actually seen the Earth in totality, right? Been deep enough in space to actually be able to put their thumb and block Earth out. And of course, only 12 walked on the moon. And reflect on, estimated 110 billion people have ever lived. The number of people who cross the Kármán line are just ridiculously a small percentage of humanity. And just reflect on, of course, this billionaire number moves around daily, but about 2,200 billionaires, about 1,000 Nobel Prizes awarded. So you're more likely to be a billionaire or a Nobel Prize winner than you are to have crossed the Kármán line. And that's changing, of course. We've got Virgin, they're now grounded, doing a refurbishment until next year, but they've opened up ticket sales again. Of course, Richard went earlier this year to great fanfare. And then, of course, Blue Origin, they just had another flight. The William Shatner remarks, I don't know if, I assume many of you saw those remarks. It's really the first time we've sent an artist to space. And I thought he was incredibly eloquent and quite incredibly poetic with his words, talking about the blue comforter of space. I was blown away by his remarks. And I think increasingly when we get everyday citizens to space and more people who have these broader emotional perspectives, I think we're going to get more context as well. So of course the price, I think the new ticket price with Virgin is $400,000, $395, I believe is the number, round numbers. That's expensive. Most people can't afford that. That's a top 1% ticket price for sure. So as Robert mentioned earlier, I'm very passionate about asking the question, what about the rest of humanity? How do we open this up for others? And I think it's critical. So I did found Space for Humanity in 2017. It's run by a superstar named Rachel Lyons. I remain on the board. And it's really all about democratizing access to space, selecting crews that would fly eventually orbitally, but initially suborbitally. And then in exchange for being sent to space and being part of this crew, coming back to Earth and basically taking on a fellowship to make the world a better place. And that's really the commitment in return for getting their ticket paid for. So this is a bit hyperbolic, of course, but the ambition would be anyone could be born anywhere in the world and have the ambition to go to space and potentially the capability and opportunity to do it eventually. And I think that's really, really, really important as we're trying to inspire the next generation. I think role models are key, access is key, and getting people excited about the future is key. So I'm super passionate about this. I encourage you to check out Space for Humanity. We had a great month last month where Virgin Galactic had the raffle benefit Space for Humanity. And then Space for Humanity was also the beneficiary of the $1 million gifts that Blue Origin did via their foundation, Foundation for the Future. So that was quite a surprise, and it's going to open up access to a lot of people to go to space, which is great. So let's talk about market implications. I want to reflect a bit on what's happening in the market and how we can create more economic sustainability, because I think that's critical, especially for deep space. So as we know, space is a large market, but it is going parabolic. It is going exponential. We're finally hitting the hockey stick of growth that's promised in every business plan I've ever read. And basically, depending on what investment bank you listen to, we're going from roughly $300 billion market to $1 trillion market by as early as 2030 or as late as 2040. And some people have that market at 2 trillion. It depends a little bit on what you include in that. But the point is the growth is going to be absolutely, unlike anything we've ever seen. But we have tremendous disruption. So with all respect to the most capable companies in the industry sitting at the top, they're large and it's difficult for them to innovate. So the whole new space phenomenon is real. And what you often see with these S-curves, it's classic S-curve, where you have a company that has rapid growth, they calcify a bit, they start to not invest as much in innovation or structurally have impediments to innovation. And then you have an upstart that initially is the bottom end of the market. And I want to make that key point. Disruption always happens from the bottom end, not the top end, right? When you think about SpaceX's first rocket, it wasn't a Six Sigma classified satellite launch, right? And so you eat away at the bottom end of the market. But what ends up happening is as that disruptive technology starts getting more and more of the economics of a particular segment, and they rapidly innovate, that's the key thing, rapidly iterate and innovate to make the product better, you reach a point where there's a tipping point. Of course, we've seen this in launch now with SpaceX. And now, in addition to SpaceX winning a lot of the launches that they were winning previously, they're now getting the most difficult missions, right? The ones that require literally Six Sigma reliability. So the whole market then inverts. So it's a really interesting phenomenon. I would recommend to you, if you haven't read it, The Innovator's Dilemma, written by Clay Christensen, who passed away a couple of years ago, Harvard professor. But he writes very eloquently on this this disruption, it's a pattern that repeats in many industries. So just to emphasize this point, this graph shows global PC sales in the light blue line, and then global mobile phone sales beginning in 2007 in the solid blue line. But for those of you old enough to remember, if I would have told you in, let's say, 2005, that the compact computer or Dell computer on your desktop was going to be disrupted by your flip phone, you would have said I was crazy, right? Or that your Pentax camera that costs $400 or $500 was going to be disrupted by your flip phone. Same response, right? And not only did it disrupt both of those technologies and both of those capabilities, but it far, far, far exceeded the unit sales for PCs. So it created market demand where it wasn't previously seen. So what is holding space back? What do we need to do to really take advantage of where we are in the industry? And this is what I'm super passionate about. This is what I'm building at Voyager, Voyager Space, the company I run. And it's really about assembling capability and also putting capital structures in place that are sustainable. So what do I mean by that? Well, I call them the four horsemen of space finance. Some of them are a bit obvious, but let me drill down on it a bit. The four horsemen are illiquidity, risk, high capital expenditures, and long time horizons. So let's unpack that a little bit. First, let me just talk about, forgive the Finance 101 lesson here, but we just talk about risk versus return. So this is just sort of a classic matrix that shows you if you want a very, very low risk, bottom left, you're not going to get a great return, right? That's a money market fund or a T-bill or something like that. And at the very, very extreme are things like emerging markets and private equity and things of this nature. And space is perceived to be at that upper right-hand corner in terms of risk. So the whole point here is that investors in anticipation of higher risk expect a higher return. That's point one. And point two, they're willing to assume some of that risk as long as it's a liquid investment. They can trade in and out of it quickly. They don't want to be trapped in something with no way to get out. So those are two key points that I just wanted to make from this slide here. The other point is you have a company that's just been formed, call it a startup. When their capital needs are high, which is at the beginning of their formation as they're building the product or service, that's also when the risk is high, right? So you have a situation where the company needs lots and lots of money, but the risk is extremely high, right? So that's classically where an angel investor would typically play. Over time, as revenue starts being generated and the company has become de-risked, there's lots of other types of capital that are available. So previously, our industry was stuck kind of in this bar here. We didn't have enough early stage capital. We didn't have enough angel investors. And early in my space career, that's really where I focused because that's where I thought the need was. I think we've unlocked that. I think the early stage capital is available. We're certainly way more available than it used to be. Where I think we're stuck now is a bit later stage. And 2021 has been a banner year. I think we have a lot of examples of how this is going much better than it has in the past. So I kind of put us where this black diamond is. And so to get to the next step, we need a few things, not the least of which are exits. Some of that has happened in the public market with the so-called SPACs, if you've heard of that, which is just a unique way of going public as opposed to going the old-fashioned way. That's good and bad. SPACs are also high risk, and if they don't perform well, it can have the opposite effect, where industry could be a bit tainted and be perceived to be not ready for prime time. So back to the four horsemen of space finance: illiquidity, risk, high capex, and long time horizons. Let's drill down on those and talk about how we might be able to mitigate those, because it's really critical, I think, to our future success. So part of the issue with space is that it's both risky and illiquid, right? So if you're investing in companies that aren't publicly traded and they're incredibly risky, if it goes wrong, you have no ability to get out of it. So first and foremost, we need more publicly traded space companies. Voyager Space hopefully will be one of those early next year. Certainly that's our intention. And there are others I know that are planning that as well. So, but we need those companies to be successful. That's critical. Time horizons and capex are high, but there are ways to mitigate that. I'll talk about that here in a moment. But also the good news is the expected returns within the industry are high. And I think that's the one thing space has going for it, is people can imagine this multi-billion dollar, maybe even trillion-dollar economy in space. So that's certainly helping investor demand. And I think collaboration can also help mitigate some of these four horsemen. What do I mean by collaboration? Well, second point here, industry standards. Part of the issue I think we have is we don't have enough standardization in the industry. People aren't designing to particular standards, which would not only reduce cost, but allow us to scale up. And classically, the more scale any company has or any industry has, the lower the costs, right? That's what we imagine with space tourism. That $400,000 price will go down to, hopefully $50,000 within, not too long of a time. But that all has to do with the scaling of that capability. So industry standards are critical. Minimal flameouts. What do I mean by that? We've had some high-profile companies that didn't make it, you're always going to have that a bit. But I do think we need to minimize. I'm a bit concerned about launch. At last count, I think there's something like 160 launch companies. I don't know what the correct number of launch companies should be steady state, but it's not 160. If I had to guess, I think it's probably 2 or 3, maybe 4. So a lot of those companies won't make it. They're raising a lot of capital. There's going to be a lot of disappointed investors. So I think that's one example where we really need to minimize. And I would encourage entrepreneurs who are thinking about a launch company to go find something else to innovate around, because I think SpaceX and others have really cracked this nut. We need to build more scale. And again, this is why I'm really focused on this at Voyager, is to make sure that the industry itself and these new space entrepreneurs and those capabilities are being scaled and harnessed. Those capabilities are the ones that we really have to unlock if we're going to take this next step. And then last but not least, we need more success stories. What do I mean by that? Either companies being acquired by other companies or public company exits. But investors, it's a flywheel, right? So if they invest and they see how the capital is returned in the future, and the capital has been compounded, then they're much more inclined to reinvest again, and it becomes a virtuous circle. All right, so let me just wrap up with a few thoughts here. So one would be an observation, and then I want to make a prediction and perhaps a call to action. But the observation I would have, and this is really kind of synthesizing what I've been talking about, is the companies in our industry with the capability, in my view, and I say this respectfully, lack ambition. And they're not looking at the big problems. I put SpaceX aside, by the way. I'm talking really more about the large primes. So they have the capability, but they don't really have the ambition to do anything with it. And the companies with the ambition, my observation is in our industry, companies with the ambition lack the capability. And that's why I'm passionate about really assembling this capability and harnessing both, because I do think if we create companies that have both of these characteristics, that's ultimately going to open the high frontier. That's when we get the leg up. That's when we get a sustainable space economy. So I would challenge the larger companies to be bolder and have more ambition with what they're doing. And the small companies that have the ambition, I would encourage you to find economic models that allow you to unlock your capability and fly in formation with other companies and do great things in the industry. So that's my call to action on that. Okay, prediction, kind of a silly one, but I do think we're going to mint more new astronauts next year in 2022 than any previous decade. I see it accelerating tremendously, not only orbital launches with SpaceX, and I know Axiom and other companies are doing launches as well, but I do think we're also going to get a lot of suborbital flights next year. So I do think that's going to be transformational. Why does it matter? Well, it matters for the reasons I said earlier, right? When we have people that people know who have been to space, and it becomes a more commonplace activity, I think we really have an opportunity to get people excited about the future. And so, so I do think it matters. I also think it matters for investment. I think more retail investors will be engaged in that. So just a call to action. I can't wrap up the presentation without hopefully motivating you to do something with this information, but really 3 things. Either build something useful. And when I say build, I mean build something functional, write something, right? I founded a space philosophy site called 2211.world that I'd recommend you check out. But there's this counter narrative about space that to me, it's a false choice, that we're escaping Earth, or that we're abandoning Earth, or we're not focused on Earth. In my view, we go to space to benefit Earth, not only from technology, but in terms of inspiration and education and all the other things. So that's my viewpoint. And I've written a lot on that, but I would encourage you to have a point of view, to write that. We need narratives to combat some of the nastier narratives that are out there. And then the third, lift someone up. What do I mean by that? Well, educate somebody, mentor somebody, inspire somebody. Our industry needs to be younger. It needs to be more diverse. Why do I say that? Because space is hard, and we can't do it with a fraction of humanity. We need to do it with 100% of humanity. So I would encourage you to find somebody that you can lift up, that you can mentor, that you can make better, that you can inspire. And then better yet, do all 3. Build something, write something, and lift someone up. I think that would be great. If we all did that, everyone listening, to this presentation, I think we can make a big, significant impact on important issues. So with that, I will wrap up and answer any questions that anyone might have.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Dylan. We'll start with questions. And the first question comes from Nicholas. And they say, "Dear Dylan, I'm concerned that as more people go into space, the amount of debris in orbit will increase drastically. How would you address this concern?"
It's an important issue. Voyager is actually signatory, together with SpaceX and Planet and other companies, Astra is involved, to the space sustainability rating with the World Economic Forum. I'm not a huge fan of regulation, but I think in the case of space debris, we probably need more regulation. Why do I say that? I think we need very clear guidance that if you're going to launch hardware to orbit or suborbit, you need some ability to deorbit that hardware. And I don't think it can be just disposable. I don't think you can say, well, it's going to atrophy, it's going to burn up on its own. So I think that's point one. Point two, there are some great companies, Leo Labs is one, that are getting better data, right, with ground-based radar. JSOC, which is the main data provider, is great, but they don't have necessarily all the data available in the public domain because it serves a dual purpose with the military. So that's a second key point, is getting better data. And then third, which is also important, is the ability to algorithmically understand where the conjunctions are going to happen. So there are other companies, I've talked to a couple of startups that are really working on better prognostication on where the conjunctions might happen and might occur, so that we can create advanced warning on that. But you correctly point out, it's a tragedy of the commons. There's no doubt about it. Incrementally, the risk is low for each of us to launch a constellation, but collectively the risk is high. So it's a classic tragedy of the commons. And I do think it's probably an area we need more regulation for.
Thank you. Next
Sure.
question comes from Kelly. They say, "Mr. Taylor, what solid propellant alternatives are at the forefront of space exploration? And what is the likelihood of a solid fuel alternative will be used for the first uncrewed Mars mission? Thank you."
Yeah, solids are tough, right? Because they don't modulate typically. There are technologies for solids that modulate, but it's a little tricky. It's essentially a boundary layer on the solid that's being lit and relit. But typically that's the challenge with solids, is you're one and done, you light it and it's on, and then it'll exhaust itself. So that's why typically the compressed fluids are better, because you have a nozzle and you can modulate. What I think is true, and I know Robert and others share this view, I think, as well, is we really need to focus on other propulsion technologies if we're going to really build a deep space economy. I think nuclear, in these kinds of technologies, and I know there's some regulatory challenges with pursuing that, but with respect to the people who are working on chemical rockets, in general, I think chemical rockets for deep space are dumb, right? Just the physics of it make no sense, but it's the best available technology we have today. But I think, 500 years from now, I think it'll look like a horse and buggy going to Mars on chemical.
Thank you. Next question is, where do you see intermediate ambition resource companies like Sierra Nevada, Dream Chaser fitting into the space economy equation?
Yeah, I respect Sierra Space very much. I think they're important players. I mean, I think Dream Chaser is an important vehicle, not only for cargo resupply, but ultimately potentially human travel as well. But I think, the more the merrier. I think this is an industry where we need lots and lots and lots of successful companies, but we do need more scale. I think Sierra Space is an important part of the future of the industry, and I admire what they're doing.
Wonderful. And we have one more minute, maybe, for the last question. Sure. And it comes from Ellison. What is your vision for the international community, including governments joining forces to create a global space economy?
Yeah, it's a great question. The natural state of business is global, right? If you look at every industry is naturally globalized. So that's the natural state. Space is tricky because there's a big defense implication, and we have ITAR and CFIUS and other regulations that govern. I think realistically, there will be more globalization in space, but I see it as a dual economy. I see it basically a US-led Western space economy and a Chinese-led Eastern space economy. I don't see a lot of overlap with those communities. I think the defense implications are pretty tight. So unfortunately, I think more globalization, but it's going to be a bit fractionalized with two camps is what I see.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for your answers.
Yeah, thank you.